Nihilism is becoming dangerously popular, and it's no longer just in philosophy classrooms or those weird subreddits. It's in the way millions of real people are talking about life itself.
Why is nihilism so taboo? Why? Like, genuinely, none of this shit fucking matters. Like, none of it fucking matters.
We are the generation that is waking up to the myth of the American dream.
I think Gen Z is dubbed the nihilist generation because they feel that they have wasted their time and their money pursuing a degree that we were told to pursue, and it's amounting to nothing.
We're all gonna die. None of this shit fucking matters.
Everywhere you look, it seems like people have completely given up and are now questioning if there's any reason to get up in the morning, and beyond that, they're questioning existence and life itself. This is terrifying. Because if enough people start to believe that nothing matters, morality, purpose, and hope begin to disappear, and at the end of that road is complete societal collapse. And as someone who has always been interested in philosophy and has studied nihilism extensively over the years, I was intrigued with this modern resurgence. So, I spent the last few months studying everything I could about nihilism to try and figure out why nihilism is taking over our modern society. And the results that I found were very strange. Because although at the end of nihilism is complete societal collapse, that might not be as bad as it sounds. When trying to understand nihilism holistically, we run into some problems. The first is that the concept is ambiguous. It can refer to a lack of belief or ideology, and it can also refer to this lack of ideology as an ideology. That's the difference between someone being disillusioned and rejecting a belief system and someone choosing to embrace nothingness as a belief system. One is passive in their nihilism, and the other is active. The word applies to both of these positions. Now, the concept of nihilism isn't actually that old. Its creation is credited to several authors, such as the Swiss physician and philosopher Jacob Hermann Obereit. In his book, Jacob criticized Immanuel Kant's theory of knowledge, referring to it as nihilism. The German philosopher Friedrich Jacobi is most commonly credited with the origin of its philosophical use. In a letter, he derisively referred to Johann Gottlieb Fichte's German idealism as a form of nihilism. In either case, the word is used to negatively characterize a philosophical position. It's like a bad word in the same way philosophers would use the word solipsism, which refers to the belief that only you exist. If your philosophy is being characterized by either word, you might be in trouble. Nihilism as a concept became more widely known in the 19th century when it took on a political dimension. The last time you voted, you probably didn't notice a candidate for the nihilism party on your ballot. Political nihilism isn't a movement so much as it's a way of characterizing a political attitude. It was often used to discredit extreme political ideology and anti-establishment movements. In Russia, so-called political nihilism exploded in the 19th century. These were socialist and anarchist movements that were quickly gaining in popularity. Critics of these movements routinely referred to them as nihilism in order to dismiss them. In general, nihilism was used to slander any political group that was deemed threatening to the status quo. It was largely used by conservatives at the time. One such critic was the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. He once belonged to a socialist group, but was apprehended by the authorities and sentenced to death by the Russian Tsar. However, the author was released right before his execution and sentenced instead to years in a labor camp. After his near-death experience, Dostoevsky rejected socialism and other revolutionary causes. He felt they ignored the dignity of humanity and our need for individual freedoms. From his experience working in a labor camp, he yearned to feel the fruits of his labor that he sorely lacked in confinement. He strongly felt that socialism would similarly rob humans of experiencing the rewards of their work. In the setting of crime and punishment, he puts on display the way radical change leaves people behind. The people are poor and destitute, while the revolutionary-minded are uncaring of their plight. Political nihilism, more broadly, can be summarized as the belief that the current political establishment is corrupt and needs to be destroyed. Modern populism is a form of political nihilism, or at least can be characterized in this way. Both right and left variations insist that the system needs to be overhauled, and they latch onto the myth, and often reality, that our political representatives are too corrupt to salvage. Donald Trump seized on this belief to become president twice.
I am your warrior, I am your justice, and for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution, I am your retribution.
While leftist populism has largely struggled to seize power, proponents of political nihilism, aside from anarchists, would likely not self-identify as nihilists. The term in this context is intended to delegitimize political movements. It's not yet a stable concept at this point in time. However, as we'll see, the concept of nihilism is taken much more seriously later on in the works of the existentialist Friedrich Nietzsche. The philosopher is often associated with nihilism and is widely thought to have embraced it. But is it true that he advocated for a belief in nothingness? Was that really his gift to the world? Anyone who has seriously considered his work knows that he is not an advocate of nihilism, but that it does play an important role in his writing. Winter is coming. If you've read or watched Game of Thrones, you know this iconic phrase. A long winter is coming for the people of Westeros, and so too is the army of the dead. This story element mirrors Nietzsche's concept of cultural nihilism quite well. Winter is a stand-in for nihilism, and the army of the dead is the death of God. With the rise of scientific explanations for the universe and life on Earth, the dominant belief in the Christian God was rapidly weakening in Nietzsche's time. Philosophers in the mid-19th century were busy trying to rationally justify Christian values that were quickly losing their spiritual underpinning. Ultimately, Nietzsche thought that this was a lost cause and that humanity risked sinking into a cultural abyss. He suggests that they actually stem from the resentment of slaves towards their masters. Through religion, the slaves elevated the opposite values of their masters, which supported their own way of being. They were meek, humble, and forgiving. They condemned the values of their masters, suggesting that a life lived this way would land them an eternity in hell. For a religion where forgiveness plays such a central role, it's odd that eternal damnation is always such a staple. Nietzsche would suggest that this contradiction comes from the nature of resentment. The philosopher takes this argument a step further by suggesting that Christianity, along with Plato and Socrates, was nihilistic. They placed all value in a realm beyond the physical one. For Christians, that is the realm of God and the heavens. Plato and Socrates valued a world of forms as the source of true knowledge. In the Christian scheme, worldly life is deemed worthless. Its value is taken away, which is why Nietzsche referred to Christianity as a form of nihilism. This life is just a vehicle to get to the good place in the next one. Plato and Socrates devalued the real world by putting ideas above how we experience life. They used reason as a tool to judge life from an external point of view. In Plato's allegory of the cave, he suggests that our sensory experience is like being trapped in a cave, looking at the shadows on the wall. These shadows, for Plato, are illusions. The real world, which for him was the world of ideas, exists outside of the cave. Plato and Socrates ultimately suggest that the world you experience is an error compared to the perfect world of ideas that can only be discovered through reason. For Nietzsche, this is a big problem, as it devalues the physical world and makes it impossible to create values based on life. Plato and Socrates would accuse those worldly values of just being shadows. Nietzsche himself was not a nihilist. He believed that nihilism was harmful to humanity, leaving people in a state of despair and directionlessness and prone to destructive tendencies. He wanted to help humanity overcome nihilism and move towards something better. To accomplish this, he identified two ways of responding to it: passively and actively. The passive person finds no value in anything and despairs at the lack of a greater purpose in a life that they feel that they've lost. They turn their back on existence and treat it as a punishment. This was how Nietzsche described Buddhism, Hinduism, and Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy. He rejected the idea that life is suffering or that being reborn is a punishment. His response was to say yes to the world, to embrace it as it is beyond the structures we impose on it, such as religion, science, and even philosophy. To actively respond to nihilism, we have to re-evaluate our lives and consistently and continually create new ones. It's a constant process of deconstruction and creation. If we don't continuously overcome values and norms, we risk nihilism again, as these values will eventually not reflect the lives we live. For Nietzsche, these values needed to be aesthetic ones about life and vitality. In other words, he wanted them to be life-affirming. Logic and reason are too systematic. Like Christianity, they place a superior dimension above our physical existence. Nietzsche is often considered a moral nihilist, but that's not completely true, as we will see. A moral nihilist believes that there are no absolute moral or ethical values. When we talk about morality, we are actually just referring to social constructs likely derived from emotions and power relations. Nietzsche didn't believe in the absolute nature of moral values. The universal morals that philosophers have formulated are better understood not as exercises of reason, but as coming from that person's physiological or psychic state. As Nietzsche explains, every great philosophy so far has been the personal confessions of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. When we read the moral works of philosophers Immanuel Kant or John Stuart Mills, we learn not about universal ethical systems, but about who we are. Just as Nietzsche believed that we should always be constructing new values, we should also be working on moral values. However, the idea is not to create values for everyone equally. People are different and should embrace morals that are more suited to them. Nietzsche believed in higher and lower types, for example, insisting that each should have their own moral value set. Free will was always an issue for him. Moral systems presume that people have free will and are able to choose between good and evil. But Nietzsche, along with many modern scientists, doesn't believe that humans possess free will and are therefore not morally responsible for their own choices. For the average person, this take on morality will come across as nihilism. We are very used to thinking about this in terms of moral absolutes. Our culture is still very informed by the long shadow of Western philosophy and religion. But for Nietzsche, the idea is to push beyond nihilism into a mode of value creation. The philosopher was certainly bold for his time, but he wasn't the first thinker to question moral ideals. Some of the earliest critiques of universal morals can be found over 2,000 years ago in a Chinese religion. Taoism is unique among religions in that it is uninterested in moral claims or in any notion of a greater purpose that would inform our actions. For the creators of Taoism, morality is an ineffective way to deal with our problems. It's not particularly good, for example, at encouraging others to behave better, as righteousness often inspires the opposite, and it only temporarily seems to soothe us like a painkiller. Taoism instead suggests that morality comes from finding an outcome desirable and wanting to repeat that outcome despite how futile that struggle will be. When we try to eliminate what we consider morally bad, we're trying to control what we cannot control. It's like demanding more flowers and less dirt, where one requires the other. For the Tao, moral ideals result in hypocrisy and also an attitude of hostility to parts of ourselves that don't live up to our moral standards. We often then project that hostility outward to target others who don't live up to our moral expectations. That's why you often see morally righteous people targeting others while ultimately being hypocrites themselves. According to Taoism, the source of our problems is that we are not following the great Tao, or the way. You can follow this path through a series of practices, such as taking non-deliberate action, leading to a sort of harmony. You accept the bounds of flower and dirt, and you don't demand more of one than the other. Many would go on to describe Taoism as a form of moral nihilism, but just like with Nietzsche, that misses the point. The religion rejects the notion of living with a greater purpose. It's more about following a way than a purpose, and that is what creates harmony. Beliefs are ultimately useless to the Tao. However, this lack of a greater purpose or meaning is a difficult pill for many to swallow, especially those with a background steeped in Christian and Western norms. After Nietzsche described the death of God, many philosophers reckoned with the challenge of meaning. This created a philosophical movement known as the atheist existentialism. Life has no meaning. There is no existential human nature and no grand purpose. Existentialist writers in the 20th century wrestled with these conclusions that the death of God had laid bare. Without the illusions that society was built upon, we're left with nothingness. We're in a state of nihilism. Just like Nietzsche, philosophers of this movement tried to respond actively to nothingness. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre insisted that because of our nihilist reality, we are condemned to be free. We are thrown into this world with no default essence or purpose, and as a result, we are ultimately responsible for everything we do. He goes on further to suggest that we are free in every moment. Even when tied down with ropes, we are free to choose how we approach that situation. When we stand on a bridge high above a body of water, some of us are struck with a fear, not that we will accidentally fall, but that we'll throw ourselves off. Sartre described this feeling as an anguish towards our freedom. Nothing prevents us from throwing ourselves off. We are always free to do so. To live authentically, we have to take full responsibility for our freedom by choosing our own values and how we live in general. We can't appeal to a higher purpose and a pre-existing set of rules. We have to choose for ourselves. For Sartre, nihilism is the burden of freedom. The French writer Albert Camus took a different approach to the concept of nothingness. He found the idea of pursuing our own meaning or creating values to be self-defeating. There's no escaping the absurdity of human life. We yearn for meaning from a world that doesn't give us answers. He compared human absurdity to Sisyphus' struggle. In a Greek myth, Sisyphus was forced to push a boulder up a hill for an eternity. When he reached the top, the boulder fell right back down, and he had to start again. For Camus, this struggle is just like our continual push for meaning. Just when we think we've found a sense of purpose, it eludes us. Life has no concrete answers for us, and the boulder rolls back down the hill. Camus' answer to the problem of nothingness was to live facing absurdity directly. We should confront nihilism by carrying on despite its consequences. To live authentically is to be fully conscious of the abyss and to defy it with our head held high, just like Sisyphus boldly marching down the mountain. While atheist existentialists grappled with meaning in a world that offered none, postmodernist philosophers rejected any sort of meta-narrative. They would not entertain them or seek them out in some vain struggle. Instead, they embraced nihilism in an almost cheerful way. They were extremely skeptical of truth claims and moral hierarchies, and with this attitude, they deconstructed how truth functions in society. The French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard described these meta-narratives as language games that we use to make sense of the world. These are fields like religion, science, and philosophy. There's no all-encompassing order to the world that we can understand. We just have these language games to interpret it. Lyotard believes that these games shouldn't compete for supremacy the way science sometimes is used to undermine religion. He insisted that they should exist in paralogy, running alongside one another with no hierarchy. Another French philosopher, Michel Foucault, described this process as a form of enlightenment. We are freeing ourselves from the assumptions about knowledge that control our lives. In his view, knowledge is not objective or neutral, it's shaped by power relations. Power influences how knowledge is produced and even what is considered to be knowledge. When producing research or journalism, for example, we don't just freely follow our interests or act randomly. Power determines what is an acceptable pursuit and what isn't. Often, what is considered knowledge is determined by its economic value. Does it make the institution you're operating in more revenue? Does it free up space in the budget? Does it draw an audience? Via institutions, power uses knowledge to shape individuals, and as Foucault insists, this is to create compliant citizens. This is why most institutions in society are designed like prisons. The idea is that subjects in these places, such as schools or psychiatric wards, are either being observed or in a state where they are potentially watched at all times. The individual then conforms their behavior under the assumption that they are being monitored and could be punished, even if they aren't necessarily always under that watchful eye. What all postmodernism has in common is a near full embrace of nihilism, which aims to disassemble the larger narratives that control our lives. It is an active deconstruction inspired by the likes of Nietzsche, only they weren't so much interested in creating new values. The point is to free us from the imperfect knowledge that insidiously controls our behavior in society and the many institutions that it comprises. I've seen people online embrace something called optimistic nihilism, and I wanted to clarify what that is in the context of the categories that we've already discussed. The basic idea is that life is meaningless, but that means that we're free to find joy and meaning wherever we please. Some of you may have already realized that optimistic nihilism sounds awfully similar to existentialism, especially in Albert Camus' Absurdism. And it is, except that the concept is much simpler and perhaps created by people who were only so familiar with the history of existentialism and philosophy in general. In our exploration of nihilism, there's a common thread in each classification. The philosophers and writers involved don't consider themselves nihilists. And given our close examination, we've demonstrated that they're not advocates for nothingness, but deal with it directly in their writing. They bravely face the reality of nihilism and actively negotiate what to do despite its consequences. But there is a notion of a true nihilism, one who sits in nothingness and passively lets it consume them. This is what we call a postmodern nihilist. Well, not to be confused with the postmodernists that we just discussed, although postmodernism is often referred to as postmodern nihilism. I'm sorry if this is getting confusing. They're described as being indifferent conformists who put all of their energy and effort into hedonistic endeavors. They're deeply resentful and alienated, occasionally exploding into violence. They have no sense of greater purpose and languish in its absence. The philosophers who reckon with nihilism are generally trying to steer humanity away from becoming this kind of person. Nietzsche described a similar type as, quotes, the last man. People who preoccupy themselves with comforts and security while taking no risks. You could also describe them as passive nihilists. In Camus' book The Stranger, his main character, Meursault, finds no value in anything. He's indifferent to his mother's passing and feels nothing in his relationships. Meursault is also not emotionally impacted when he kills someone. In the book, however, he eventually embraces the absurdity of life as he's about to be executed. What is clear from every type of nihilism is that those who engage with it were not interested in sitting idly in nothingness. The point was always about navigating the world without a pre-existing purpose and universal truths. Finding no value in anything is not a healthy way to be. As Nietzsche famously said, "He who fights with monsters might take care lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." When you spend so much time dwelling on nothingness, you slowly become it. Finding value is important for your well-being. It may not be a universal truth, but most of us will struggle as we sit in that abyss. The lack of a greater truth was not the most interesting part about nihilism. It is the opportunity to pursue new or just different truths separate from the narratives that have shaped the society around us. The established truths we're accustomed to can be comforting, for sure, but they can also alienate others and lead to dangerous convictions. People kill for moral convictions all the time. And you could argue that large-scale murder is often done for the sake of a diluted sense of morality. But what if we're free to assign purpose to whatever we'd like? Sometimes we belittle our interests because they don't contribute to a higher purpose that was instilled in us at a young age. We may reject the idea of wandering aimlessly up a mountain because it doesn't improve our workplace skills. We may reject friendships because our faith in God devalues the other person and their lifestyle. As consumerists, we often indulge in the immediate pleasures of media consumption or video games because they reflect an ingrained value that we have. You work hard and you play hard. Your consumption contributes to economic growth, and so it has value. Coming face to face with nihilism is a painful process that does open up new possibilities in our lives, but it's not all misery. It can also relieve pressure and anxiety from the demands of those higher purposes. Most of us don't live up to the standards that are placed on us, and now we don't need to worry about it. How is your career going, by the way? Don't answer that. It doesn't matter. What I want to know is how the texture of wet rocks makes you feel. It's important to me, at least in this moment. We're past the point of no return. Nothing we do will matter anymore. The world is ending. Have you heard anyone say these things recently? Maybe you've even said them yourself, and you're not alone. With wars and economic crises raging, global temperatures and extreme weather increasing, and a world growing increasingly divided politically and culturally, it certainly feels like we might be approaching doomsday. In fact, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved the doomsday clock to 86 seconds to midnight, the closest to catastrophe it's ever been. No wonder so many young people around the world have labeled themselves doomers. Sure, some people might have a sunnier outlook and see technological, medical, and cultural advancements as a sign that we are not approaching the end of days. But let's look at what doomerism is, why so many people have fallen into its trap, and what alternative ways of thinking about these difficult times might look like. The state of the world. So, I have a question for you, Emeka. Do you ever hear the news, or you're out and about on the streets, and you just have a moment where you sit down and you think, just things are not going well?
Yeah, every day, like whether it's local news or even just going on TikTok or Twitter, every day it feels like the world is just getting worse and worse. And yeah, it can get very, very overwhelming at times, honestly.
Yeah, and I think most people would agree with you and would share that sentiment.
In the United States, most people, around 80%, believe that today's youth will be worse off than their parents, according to a Wall Street Journal poll. And in another poll from Pew Research, at least 2/3 believe that the nation will become economically weaker, less important globally, and more politically divided by 2050. All around us, people envision a future of decline and despair. But this isn't isolated to the United States. South Africa has seen the largest drop in the proportion of people saying that the country is headed in the right direction, dropping 9 percentage points to 25%. Peru's level of concern about crime and violence is 11 points higher than this time last year, and Argentina has reached record levels of concern about unemployment. Pew Research Center found that across 36 nations, a median of 54% of people see economic inequality as a very big problem. And Atlantic Council poll finds widespread expectations of declining global relations, nuclear proliferation, and climate stress. All of this, on top of conflicts raging in the Middle East, Europe, and Africa, have the entire world on edge. It's no surprise that the Reddit community r/collapse has about 500,000 members. It discusses slow, systemic decline, emphasizing climate, geopolitical risk, resource depletion, and all-around pessimism in governments and societies. On X, you can find a mix of climate scientists, collapse commentators, and doomer meme culture. And on YouTube, channels like Collapse Chronicles, Deep Adaptation Forum, or Guy McPherson's Climate Talks that predict pending human extinction have fed doomer narratives.
Honestly, it just feels like everywhere you look, there's someone that's telling you that the entire world is about to collapse and that we should all be scared. It's like fear-mongering to an insane level, honestly.
You can go on X or you can go on social media, but it's also in our media itself. Off the top of my head, Children of Men, Last of Us, Black Mirror is really huge for it. I could go on and on, Shaun of the Dead. They're like what I like to call, and I don't want to disparage them, they're perfectly fun media, but they're kind of doomer propaganda, if that makes any sense to you. Now, philosopher Philippa Stroud, she's one of Britain's top conservative figures at the moment, describes our current era as one in which people almost expect perpetual decline, where the young generation is essentially in a constant state of hopelessness and destabilization. And it's this sentiment that has kind of given rise to this pseudo-philosophy of doomerism.
The rise of doomerism.
What exactly is doomerism?
Doomerism is a worldview characterized by the belief that civilizational, environmental, or societal collapse is inevitable, and importantly, that nothing meaningful can be done to stop it. So we might as well all fall into despair, resign our fate, and give up hope. The term doomer emerged online in the late 2000s and early 2010s, particularly within forums discussing the oil and gas industry, climate catastrophe, and overall societal collapse. It gained traction through internet culture and is often depicted in the form of a melancholic, chain-smoking meme character known as the Doomer. Doomerism has a few central characteristics. Doomers are plagued by hopelessness, a belief that any sort of mitigation or solution like climate action or government reform is too late or pointless. They'll also feel a sense of disempowerment because doomerism encourages action when our problems are seen as irreversible. These qualities also lead to isolation, as doomers withdraw from civic, social, or political life. Finally, a central belief of doomerism is the idea of moral fatalism, a view that humanity is inherently self-destructive or corrupt and therefore seals its own fate. And look, they're not without evidence to support their doom and gloom theory. The 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius warming targets set by governments and global organizations have already been lost due to political inaction and continued fossil fuel use. Because of this, doomers see environmental feedback loops such as repeated methane release and the dieback of the Amazon rainforest due to deforestation and other ecological forces will accelerate warming even without human change. The bleak outlook is that civilizations will collapse under strain from climate-driven crop failure, mass migration due to climate crisis, heat waves, and climate-driven conflict. Another core topic of the doomer movement is resource depletion, where modern civilization becomes fundamentally unsustainable due to the over-extraction of finite resources. Doomers believe that we are rapidly approaching or have already passed a peak threshold of key materials. Predictions focus on peak oil, fresh water scarcity, soil degradation, and ecological overshoot. Peak oil refers to the belief that easy-to-extract oil has peaked, and the remaining energy sources are too expensive or are damaging the environment. One need look no further than the current halting of clean energy projects in the United States or the skyrocketing electricity costs in countries like Germany to understand why the future of energy is so precarious. Water scarcity signals aquifers drying up, rivers disappearing, like we've already seen happen during droughts in the Colorado and Ganges rivers. All of this, doomers say, will lead to imminent water wars that pits countries and cultures against each other for a resource that, theoretically, should be endless. Similarly, soil degradation happens because industrial agriculture depletes topsoil and biodiversity, which threatens long-term food security. The salinization, acidification, and erosion of soil around the world is already causing farmers billions of dollars globally. All of these resource concerns fall under the idea of ecological overshoot, which occurs when humanity's demand on the planet's natural resources and its capacity to absorb waste exceeds what the Earth can regenerate within a given year. Each year, this point of no return is marked by Ecological Overshoot Day, the date when humanity's demand for ecological resources exceeds what the planet can regenerate within that year. This means that for the remainder of the year, we are essentially operating on ecological deficit spending. This year, it was July 24th. Political dysfunction is another key concept for doomers who hold a cynicism that democratic systems are incapable of long-term planning or meaningful reform. Doomers feel that governments worldwide are too compromised, slow-moving, or compromised by corporate interest to respond meaningfully to impending existential threats. They see short-sighted election cycles that prioritize immediate wins over long-term survival, lobbying and corruption from the fossil fuel and tech industries that exert a massive amount of control over policy, polarization and disinformation that paralyze democratic processes and promote tribalism, and an overall authoritarian drift that see more and more governments turning to surveillance and militarization. With politics in disarray, doomers also see a future of economic collapse and fear that capitalism and debt-ridden economies are unsustainable and therefore headed for crisis. For a long time, they would argue, the world has been living under the idea of perpetual growth, that we can keep spending, consuming, and growing. But doomers see this as a myth. On a finite planet, perpetual growth is impossible. An over-reliance on cheap credit, speculation, and central bank intervention is unsustainable, and wealth concentration at the top hollows out the true economy in addition to eroding social cohesion. With income inequality at all-time highs in many parts of the world, we see both increasing civil unrest and capitulation to billionaire agendas. We also see, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, ongoing fragility in our supply chain. Complex global networks are vulnerable to shocks, which can also include war and climate events, in addition to pandemics or other public health emergencies. But doomers don't just see these large-scale disasters as pointing towards the end of days. We're undeniably in an age of major technological and scientific development, but have we gone too far? Doomers see advanced technology, especially AI, automation, surveillance, and biotechnology as accelerating faster than society can ethically or politically manage. This, they say, could lead to dystopia, mass displacement, or full-on extinction. AGI, or artificial general intelligence, could become uncontrollable or hostile. We could see mass unemployment from automation at a time when social safety nets are shrinking or non-existent. Surveillance capitalism could also lead to technocratic control and state surveillance, which would erode privacy and autonomy. And biotech dangers like unregulated gene editing, bioweapons, or lab leaks that trigger new disasters have already unfolded before our eyes, and future damage could be even worse. Doomerism versus nihilism.
Okay, so now that I understand what doomerism is, what exactly is the difference between doomerism and nihilism? Because so far they feel pretty similar to me.
Okay, so on the surface, they are pretty similar. But the deeper you get, they are really quite different. So to understand that, we need to have a brief talk about nihilism.
Look no further than nihilism, which, on the surface, bears a lot of resemblance to doomerism. Nihilism is a philosophical belief that life lacks inherent meaning, value, or purpose. The term comes from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing. Nihilism can manifest as existential despair or radical doubt in humanity and the world. It's not a single philosophy, but instead it's a group of outlooks or moods that are united by skepticism towards the systems that control our lives. The characteristic roots of nihilism can be found in Buddhism, Greek skepticism, and Stoicism, all ancient traditions that challenge the ideas of attachment and certainty. Nihilism is also associated with Friedrich Nietzsche, who saw nihilism as the destiny of the West and the result of religion and metaphysics breaking down society. He became famous for his idea of God is dead, which signaled the decline of belief in the divine or any kind of absolute meaning. Nihilism suggests that life, morality, and purpose are inherently meaningless. Similarly to doomerism, it sees systems of value like religion, politics, or justice as either dead, hollow, or collapsing. Psychologically, both can lead to paralysis, withdrawal, or numbing humor like sarcasm, irony, or, in today's world, memes. And both are responses to the collapse of meta-narratives, which propose a single comprehensive framework for understanding the world, often with the goal of legitimizing power structures or social practices. Both nihilism and doomerism emerged in response to these big stories that give people meaning, like God or capitalism. For nihilists, meaning is absent, which leads to despair. For doomers, meaning is collapsing, which leads to fatalism. This is where people can fall into the danger zone of extremism, apathy, or depersonalization, feeling detached from your own body and existence. However, a key difference between these two ideas is that nihilism is philosophical. It is a deep doubt about meaning, knowledge, and morality. Doomerism, on the other hand, is a narrative. It's a story of decline and futility driven by twisted real-world events and trends. Nietzsche warned that without new values, nihilism would lead to passive despair or self-destruction. He therefore urged people to create their own values, a path he called the Übermensch, or superhuman. Doomerism gives up in the face of collapse, but Nietzsche urges us to push through nihilism to create a more life-affirming worldview. The will to power is Nietzsche's concept of fundamental life force. It is the drive to overcome, shape the world, and affirm life despite all of its suffering. Doomerism is the exact opposite. It expresses helplessness, paralysis, and avoidance. Doomers say things like, nothing can be done. Nietzsche said, become who you are. His message was ultimately one of positivity. Amor fati, or the concept of fate, is another concept that Nietzsche wrote about. Amor fati tells us to fully embrace life, the good, the bad, and the tragic, with a joyful spirit. He wanted people to say yes to life, even if it meant suffering. Doomerism pushes a contrary narrative, that we should wallow in resentment, fear, and nostalgia for a world that we think existed before. Doomerism and the status quo.
Honestly, I think for me, one of the biggest risks is simply that doomerism, it preserves the status quo. And it's kind of weird because doomerism tells you that the status quo is so horrible, but at the same time, that philosophy and that way of thinking, it kind of permits you to remain in the status quo. And this is especially true if like more young people start believing these doomerist ideas, because throughout history, at least as much as I know, young people are the ones who lead the charge towards change and progress. We need the wisdom of the elders and the young people's energy type of thing, like even when it's not easy or clear. So if those young people become the people who are apathetic to lead, and they don't even want to they don't believe that progress is possible, and so they don't take action, every bad system, every bad actor wins. And so it's kind of like we remain exactly where we are and there's no way out.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. Doomerism is a paralytic. It paralyzes action. If you think there's no meaning and there's no point in trying to make any kind of change or find meaning, you just stop. You stop voting. You stop organizing, you stop connecting with other people because you keep telling yourself, well, what's the point? Why even bother? So you stop imagining alternatives to the situation, the problematic reality that you're living in, and you almost succumb to apathy. You sink into it.
Unfortunately, despair can become very comforting because it absolves responsibility. You don't have to be accountable to anything if you believe that everyone else screwed it up and there's nothing that you can do. This passive cynicism, especially when circulated on the internet, can sometimes feel smart and enlightened, but it always ends in surrender. If masses of people believe that nothing can be done, those with power face no real threat. This is what they, whoever you believe they are, whether they're tech companies, large corporations, powerful governments, wealthy individuals, they want us to give up. Doomerism de-radicalizes people by convincing them not to bother. The fossil fuel industry, authoritarian governments, and massive businesses all benefit when people burn out, turn inward, and lose faith. Apathetic people don't resist. Doomerism also leads to binary thinking about the state of the world. Well, if we can't save the planet, there's no point in recycling. If capitalism can't be reformed, we're doomed to be poor forever. This kind of thinking kills the imagination and any sense of hope. Hope gives us the capacity to imagine something different. The most insidious form of control is when people can no longer imagine anything else is possible.
So what's the best alternative that we have to doomerism?
Okay, so I've put some thought into it because I've been in this situation myself, but have you ever heard of the saying, it's the only way out is through?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. And what do you think that means?
Well, to me, I think it kind of means that, there are just certain challenges in life where you cannot run away from. And to be successful, you kind of have to plow through, essentially, the most difficult path to get to the other side.
Yeah. That's similar in basic concept, and I'm delighted that you brought that up or that you phrased it that way. It's similar in basic concept to absurdism. It's just for a background, is a philosophical perspective that talks about the tension between our desire as human beings for a kind of meaning, clarity, and order, and a universe that is essentially silent, chaotic, and even indifferent to everything about us, indifferent to our existence as a whole. And essentially, with absurdism, when the world isn't giving us what we want, it so rarely does, we have to face it, even though it's absurd to do so, and not turn away from it.
Absurdism, also developed by Albert Camus among others, believed that facing the absurd, the clash between our needs and the unresponsiveness of the world, can lead to a more free and passionate life. The absurd isn't something to solve, it's something to face. Absurdism, like doomerism, stems from the world's unpredictability and oftentimes struggle, but it is action-oriented. A person who acknowledges the absurd chooses to live fully and embrace that struggle. While nihilism is defined by despair when faced with a lack of meaning, absurdism says we can embrace that lack of meaning and live anyway. Absurdism can act as an alternative school of thought to doomerism, because while doomers fall into resignation and paralysis, absurdists revolt against despair. Where doomers cling to lost systems like climate stability, social progress, or fair politics, absurdists say that even if the world doesn't offer meaning, we can still choose how we live. It gives us agency as both individuals and groups. Absurdism doesn't deny that the world is hard, it just refuses to give up on it. Both doomerism and absurdism agree that the world might be meaningless, but absurdism asks us to live meaningfully anyway.
Do you believe in destiny?
As an ego per se, I was brought up in. There's a famous saying that says, when a man says yes, his God also says yes. So in my culture, it's kind of the understanding is that, we have destiny, but at the same time, your destiny is in your hands. So it's kind of like whatever you decide, the world agrees with you. And I think it's really beautiful. But yeah, that's my understanding of destiny.
Yeah, like my grandpa always says, we make our own luck.
Exactly.
Yeah, and destiny, it might be a really helpful framework for some people. It can help contextualize a chaotic universe otherwise. But the other side of that coin, because there's always another side, is that it plays into this doomer narrative. It can be really, really unhelpful if you take it to an unhealthy extreme. And doomers, especially if you declare yourself a doomer, you might fall into the belief that we were never meant to survive as a species and that it was our destiny to wipe ourselves out.
Is a philosophical idea that can offer a slightly different point of view. It centers on the individual's experience of freedom, choice, and meaning in an uncertain or meaningless universe. Existentialism tells us that we are not born with a fixed purpose, but we have to create it ourselves. Existentialism emerged in the 19th and 20th century Europe in response to the decline of religious authority, the trauma of war, especially World War II, and the rise of industrialization and alienation, as well as a growing sense of disconnection from traditional sources of meaning, like religion. All of that sounds quite familiar to the world we're grappling with now, doesn't it? The philosophical ideas of existentialism tell us that we have radical freedom. We are free to choose our path, but this freedom can be terrifying. Without an external authority like God, nature, or tradition, we don't know what we must do or what we are meant to do. Freedom can be scary because it comes with a lot of responsibility for our actions, values, and the kind of person that we want to become. But it also leads to authenticity, which is embracing of choices that reflect our values, not a society's expectations or preset roles and rules. As similar to doomerism, existentialism talks about anxiety, which grows from uncertainty and can cause existential anxiety. But it tells us that this is a part of being human. We can act in spite of anxiety. As an alternative to doomerism, existentialism keeps us open to meaning, even if we feel like there isn't any right now. Instead of feeling powerless, we can feel free to create our own path. Rather than living in anxiety, we can reframe that uncertainty as an opportunity to exhibit courage. In existentialism, the future isn't doomed, but open-ended, and we have the power to change it. It also, refreshingly, tells us that anxiety isn't a sign of dread, but a sign of being awake. Doomerism sees uncertainty as proof that the world is ending, but existentialism sees those feelings as proof that we are conscious and alive. Anxiety is what happens when you realize you have choices to make and that there are no guarantees. And that is the definition of freedom. From 2021 to 2023, 20% of teens aged 12 to 17 reported having anxiety symptoms, and 18% reported having depression symptoms in the 2 weeks before they were surveyed. This isn't surprising, as the National Institute of Health found that depression and anxiety roughly doubled during the COVID-19 pandemic compared to the pre-pandemic. Of course, more groups have been more vulnerable to mental health struggles. LGBTQ+ youth report especially high rates. Roughly 66% experienced anxiety symptoms, and 53% reported depression. Young women have also dealt with more mental health troubles than their male peers. About 31% reported anxiety and 25% reported depression, compared to 12% and 10% among young men. Given all of this, it's not a surprise that young people are turning to doomerism. More isolated than ever, young people see disaster, inequality, and pain everywhere they turn and often don't have a community to support them through hard times and help them feel hopeful about the world. How to counter doomerism. One of the ways we can look to counter feelings of doomerism is to remember that a better future often begins with envisioning a better future. Optimism can do a lot of heavy lifting. Optimistic people report higher levels of social trust and civic engagement. They are also typically more creative, cooperative, and successful. A group called the Human Flourishing Lab suggests that increasing awareness around past progress can help inspire future progress. Expectations about progress over the next 50 years are strongly related to beliefs about progress in the last 50 years. Even though young people are the least likely to see a better future, if they look to the past and see the strides society has made, even if some of them didn't stick or didn't go far enough, attitudes might change. We can look at advancements in science, medicine, technology, and social attitudes that have drastically improved people's lives. While still imperfect, we can treat once terminal diseases, and people from all walks of life with different beliefs and identities are more accepted than ever. As a global culture, we often take historical advancements for granted. Our current frustrations feel so heavy and imminent that they prevent us from stepping outside of the present moment to gain some perspective. Remember, Nietzsche, his peers, and thinkers decades and centuries before him were struggling with the same question that we have today. How do we live a more meaningful life when all seems lost? Activist, Buddhist thinker, and author Joanna Macy proposed the idea of active hope, which suggests that we choose to act meaningfully without certainty of success. She rejected passive optimism and did not simply ask people to feel hopeful. She described hope as a practice and a choice that we make for the sake of life on Earth, regardless of the outcome. After all, the outcome is impossible to know. Active hope is rooted in the belief that our responses matter, even if we don't control the results. The idea counters the despair that defines doomerism by grounding emotion and activism in purpose, not outcome. Choosing to be hopeful and act accordingly is enough, even if the end game feels bleak or unknown.
Here's the hard part, but it's the part that we all have to work through. We all know that being told to hope is like, you got to hold on. When someone else says that, you're like, okay, off you go. But like, hope is essential to this process of breaking through doomerism, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, hope is definitely like the most powerful tool that we have, because if you don't have hope, then you can easily like fall into that doomerist trap. But like, hope is what drives you to like do things and to say, okay, it might be better. Even if there's a small chance, I'm going to like work really, really hard so that that small chance becomes a much bigger chance.
Yeah, it snowballs. You don't feel like you're doing anything at first, but then it grows, and it's so empowering. And honestly, that's why I think that hope is the ultimate antidote to doomerism.
The British philosopher Philippa Stroud proposed a remedy for despair: civic responsibility and leadership engagement. If you don't like the world in which you're living, contribute and create with your talent the solutions that you think should be there, she said. For example, the American Psychological Association, APA, published an article on how psychologists are helping youth move from climate anxiety to climate action. Nearly 99% of children globally have experienced at least one major climate or environmental hazard. Children are more physically vulnerable to these events than adults are, and also more deeply emotionally impacted by them. Extreme weather like wildfires, hurricanes, and floods are linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, and PTSD. A 2024 study of over 15,000 young Americans aged 16 to 25 found that 85% are at least moderately worried about climate change, and over 38% report that climate anxiety disrupts their daily life. That's over a third of American children having their daily lives interrupted by fear of what's happening to the environment, often at the hands of the generations before them. These disruptions and anxieties can lead to ADHD, mood disorders, impaired self-regulation, or effects on the immune, cardiovascular, and neurological systems. As much as adults might want to tell these children that everything is okay and they should stop worrying, their climate anxiety is not irrational. It reflects empathy and awareness, which are great qualities for children to foster, that are being expressed in a painful and worrisome way. Young people feel betrayed by older generations and their governments who have time and time again failed to act. But instead of despair, the APA suggests activities like nature-based therapy, hiking, and journaling. It also points to youth activism, environmental clubs, and storytelling as helpful tools to construct hope. Above all, shared activism and community work not only help buffer against anxiety, but also foster a sense of hope. Where doomerism leads to emotional paralysis and the belief that everything is collapsing and nothing can be done, small, concrete actions like organizing a meeting, planting a tree, or writing a letter can remind the brain that we aren't powerless. Agency is a core human psychological need. According to the NIH, the feeling of powerlessness increases cortisol and distress. Action breaks the loop of passive despair and re-engages the brain's problem-solving and reward systems. Taking action also shakes up the physical body, helping to release anxiety. Physical movement associated with organizing and volunteering activates the parasympathetic nervous system and can release dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, all of which are chemicals associated with motivation and mood. By combining adjusting our emotions about the end of days and taking action because of them, we can create a feedback loop of hope. Hope is not naive optimism, it's a learned behavior. If our actions lead to even small wins or just connect us with other people who might share our concerns, hope increases, which, in turn, fuels more action. You've probably felt this if you've ever signed up to volunteer somewhere. You go because you care about the cause. At the volunteer event, you learn more about the organization and you feel like you're making a difference. You meet with like-minded people who are on the same mission as you, to help. When you return home, you think to yourself, I'd like to do that again. And that's the feedback loop of hope. If you have never gone and taken action, you would never know you wanted to go back. This positive feedback loop directly counters the downward spiral of doomerism. It tells us that the road does not end at despair. We may feel despair, but if we treat it as a call to action instead of a moment of surrender, we will not only help address our worries, we will improve our lives. Our actions and our attitude influence each other over and over again. As the environmentalist David Orr said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. So let's go roll up our sleeves.
We all know how it goes. One day we're born, one day we die. Everything that happens in between we know and understand, but everything that happened before and will happen after, we know nothing about. As a result, it's really difficult to say what exactly the meaning or importance for us being here is. If we can't tell how we came or where we came from, how can we know why we're here? In the same vein, if we don't know where we're going or what we're going to become, how can we tell if any of our present actions have any significance at all? It is this uncertainty of both our collective pasts and futures that has allowed the question, what is the meaning of life, to plague humanity ever since we became sentient. We've never been able to objectively answer this question as a species. However, a lot of us have found comfort in many different ideologies to at least subdue the anxiety that it causes. In many different religions, a deity made the entire universe, put us all in it, and whatever we do on this earth will be used to determine when and how we spend eternity afterwards. For some others, the meaning of life is the love we share with friends, family, and our loved ones. Some others believe the existence of life in itself is what makes it worth living. But for nihilists, life is meaningless. All action, suffering, emotions, both good and bad, are entirely senseless and meaningless. This is nihilism, the belief in nothing. At some point in our lives, many of us have been faced with nihilistic thoughts. We're hit by a strong sense of purposelessness, like our lives have no meaning and we have no intrinsic value. Usually, this happens when we begin to question our old beliefs, but also just before we get new ones to hold on to. It's in that phase where you're growing out of your parents' beliefs, learning new things, getting new experiences, and forming your own views about the world. And usually, all of these thoughts begin with one simple question. Why? A three-lettered monosyllabic word that's capable of making anything and everything that feels like the rock of your foundation start to become slippery. Like quicksand dragging you into the misery that maybe, just maybe, your whole life hasn't been what you thought it was. Just pause and take a moment to think about your core values and just ask the question, why? Why do you believe those things? Where did they come from? Who did they come from? Keep asking and eventually you'll arrive at a point where there's no longer an answer. You'll arrive at nothing. All the religions of the world, all of our scientific discovery, but yet the question why is one that we still cannot answer. And so for the nihilist, it is at this point that they come to the conclusion that there is no why. There is no answer. There's simply nothing. As Alan Watts once wrote, life is nothing more than a trip from the maternity ward to the crematorium. It's really in the name. The term nihilism comes from the Latin word nihil, which translates to nothing, and ism, which translates to ideology. It's the ideology of nothing. But that doesn't really help us in understanding it completely. Usually, people confuse nihilism for pessimism, but they are very different from each other. Pessimists believe in the worst outcome. They have a downtrending view of the world, and tend to focus on the negatives in life, because they believe that, in the end, evil will always overcome good, and this is what makes them different. Pessimists believe that there's good in the world, but they just don't think humans are capable of doing it, at least in its entirety. Nihilists, on the other hand, do not believe in anything. They don't believe that there's evil in the world, neither do they believe that there's good in the world. In the mind of the nihilist, the world simply exists and humans created morality, thereby creating good and evil. Let's take the glass cup metaphor for instance. Optimists say you should see the glass as half full, while pessimists say we should see the glass as half empty. Nihilists? They say throw the entire cup away, because what does it matter if it's full or empty? Full, empty, good, bad, it's all irrelevant. We're all going to die anyway. Nihilism is also often compared to several other philosophies, like cynicism and apathy. But again, they are all very different from one another, and correctly categorizing your thoughts in these baskets may be harder than you think. Cynics believe that people are always motivated by self-interest. They don't believe that anyone can have intrinsically good motives. They have no faith in the human species and believe that we're all entirely selfish, only fighting for our own benefit. However, the idea that humans are not good means that in the mind of the cynic, good exists out there somewhere, just not in humans. In the mind of the nihilist, nothing exists out there. There's no good or evil. They don't see people as evil, neither do they see them as good, because they don't believe either of those things exist. They're simply traits we've applied to things. Apathetic people just don't care. They believe that there's meaning to life, but they simply don't care about it. Nihilism, on the other hand, is the idea that there's no grand design or purpose, nothing to believe in, and therefore no meaning. This brings to mind the paradox of nihilism. If you believe in nothing, then that nothing becomes something that you believe in. But since you now believe in something, then there is no nihilism, because nihilism is the belief that there is nothing. Nihilism is quite different from other philosophical ideas because it was first a literary invention before it ever became philosophical. As a result, it's not clearly defined as many of the other philosophies that exist. Many different people explained it in many different ways, but eventually these different definitions got categorized, forming many different kinds of nihilism. There's political nihilism. Political nihilists believe that for humanity to move forward as a species, all political, social, and religious order must be destroyed. Then there's ethical nihilism. It rejects the idea of absolute ethical or moral values. With this type of nihilism, good or bad is only defined by society, and, as such, it shouldn't be followed if we as a species will ever attain absolute individual freedom. We can kind of just do whatever we want. And then we have existential nihilism. It's the understanding that life has no value or meaning. It's the most popular kind of nihilism, and the one we've been talking about for most of this video. For nihilists, the existence of things like the state, religious bodies, and even communal morality is a breach on our freedom as individuals. If we can't do absolutely anything we want to do, then are we truly free? Or have we simply bound ourselves by some kind of invisible mental chain for reasons we can't explain? One night I was scrolling through Reddit and I came across the question, if you had the chance to save your pet or a stranger, who would you save? An overwhelming number of people said their pet, pretty obviously. When one commenter was confronted, they simply asked the question, why do you think a human life is worth more than that of an animal? And no one really had an answer. Of course, people tried to beat around the bush, but the question why was never answered. And that right there is the point of the nihilist. If we can't answer why we bind ourselves by these rules, then why do we choose to do it? Well, it might be because of the existential horror and the emotional anguish that comes with agreeing to the fact that life is meaningless. Think about it for a minute. If life is truly meaningless and everything we're doing has no value, then all the feats of science, the wonders of technology, things like space exploration and human rights movements, look at how far we've come. And then think about the fact that it all might just be a waste, a blip in time with no consequence whatsoever in the grand scheme of things. Knowing that all the things we experience, the ups and downs we go through, that in the end, it's all for nothing. We aren't obligated to understand the chaos of reality, just to laugh at it. Friedrich Nietzsche was a strange philosopher because he argued both for and against nihilism at the same time. Arguing for, he explained that there is no objective structure or order in our world except for the one that we create for ourselves. He once said, every belief, every considering something true is necessarily false, because there is simply no true world. He believed nihilism would expose all of humanity's beliefs and truths as nothing but a symptom of defective Western mythology. As he famously said, God is dead. Now, he wasn't talking about the actual deity of the religions, he was talking metaphorically about the power that religious orders held at the time, and how people were starting to chart their own paths, find their own meaning in life, denying what the status quo was at the time. But then, in the same breath, Friedrich argued against nihilism, saying that in the coming centuries, the advent of nihilism would drive civilization towards a catastrophe, a disaster waiting to implode, a river that has reached its end. And if you look at the most destructive civilizations in human history, we can clearly see that this is true. Long-standing cultural traditions, beliefs, religious institutions, and even financial systems are broken down, and nothingness starts to creep in. Think about it. If nothing matters and we're all just a random combination of transient atoms, how can we call Hitler objectively one of the worst humans to ever live for trying to wipe out an entire culture? At a fundamental level, most of us understand that all of these things are indeed terrible. But the danger is that because we cannot explain why we feel that way logically, we can never convince another person to follow the same path. And that is exactly what Friedrich feared. Some people still blame him for the Nazi era, because although he saw all of these dangers, he still continued preaching nihilism. He believed that if we could work through the breakdown of civilization that nihilism would eventually cause, we can then create a new course of action for mankind. He believed that to move forward as a species, we must create a new morality, one that does away with the prejudice of what existed before, because at the end of the day, tearing down your old house shouldn't make you homeless. Rather, it should present you with an opportunity to build a bigger and better home. Pause and look around you for a moment. Observe everything that's going on, particularly on social media, and you can see that we as a species might just be heading for another nihilism outbreak. Religion no longer holds any say in what is morally acceptable. People are destroying long-standing beliefs and cultural practices, and are instead charting new courses for themselves. Anything, no matter how despicable you think it is, now has a loyal fan base defending why they have a right to do whatever it is they want to do. And in reality, why not? That's the question no one can answer. Humanity will keep shifting the needle forward ever so slightly until one day, none of us will be able to tell the other that they're wrong, because why are they wrong? William Shakespeare once wrote, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing." If life is truly meaningless and we have no purpose for being here, our response should be to make the best out of a bad situation. Instead of seeing the glass half full or half empty, we can simply throw it out and drink directly from the faucet until we're satisfied. Because at the end of the day, life alone is reason enough for living. Sisyphus was a great king of Greek mythology. So clever he was able to outwit gods themselves. Twice he cheated death, first by capturing Thanatos, the god of death, then by tricking the goddess of the underworld, Persephone, into releasing him back into the lands of the living. The gods weren't happy with this, and so for his arrogance, Sisyphus was given a deceptively simple punishment: roll a boulder up a hill. The problem was that the boulder had been magically enchanted to fall back down to the bottom every time Sisyphus managed to get it to the top, effectively condemning him to an eternity of repeating the same impossible and meaningless task. Classical interpretations of the myth view it as an allegory for the futility of trying to escape death. No matter how powerful or clever a person is, we're all doomed to meet the same fate. More modern audiences have found something more relatable about Sisyphus' struggle, seeing it not as a simple parable about the inevitability of death, but more like a metaphor for the drudgery and monotony of their own lives. Every day we wake up, make coffee, take the train to work, stare at a computer for hours, get yelled at by our boss, stare at the computer some more, then take the train back home, binge Netflix or YouTube while eating dinner, go to bed, and then wake up and do it all over again. Just like Sisyphus, we seem condemned to repeat the same meaningless tasks over and over and over. Most of us do this every day for the rest of our lives as though we're sleepwalking, never waking up or stopping to ask why. For some of us, one day we're standing on a street corner preparing to go to work when in an instant we're struck by the strangeness of it all. Suddenly nothing appears to have purpose, life is haphazard and meaningless. You look around and you whisper to yourself, why are all of these people even in such a hurry? For that matter, why am I? What's the point of all this? Why am I even alive? Human beings crave meaning, it's part of our biology. We're evolutionarily programmed to search for patterns and chaos to try and understand why things are happening. It's how we learn. The problem is that existence is, at best, random and irrational. Nothing really seems to matter. Your loved ones die, stars explode, natural disasters wipe out entire cities. Millions of people spend half their day on TikTok, and for what? Yet we keep going, constantly striving to create order by giving these things purpose despite the universe denying it. This conflict is what the French Algerian philosopher Albert Camus referred to as the absurd. It's an irreconcilable paradox. We yearn for meaning in a meaningless universe. Camus uses the myth of Sisyphus as an allegory to describe this relationship. We can try to push the boulder to the top of the hill, but inevitably, it will roll back down. More often than not, the effects of this are intense feelings of anxiety, alienation, and hopelessness. We shout into the void but are met only with deafening silence, not even an echo. For most of history, people have turned to religion for answers. You didn't need to worry if your life had meaning, because some higher power was there to provide it. This all changed in 19th century Europe, as new forms of science and philosophy threatened to replace Christianity as the central axis around which people's lives revolved. Notable texts such as Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species challenged previously held beliefs about the nature of humanity, leading to a radical shift in society away from religion. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche noted this, famously declaring, "God is dead, and we have killed him." Despite what some may think, that statement wasn't claiming that God had literally been murdered, nor was Nietzsche celebrating. Rather, it was an observation that without Christianity, society had lost the foundation upon which it had built centuries-old systems of morality, metaphysics, and meaning. Nietzsche felt a great deal of anxiety about this, worrying that without a clear replacement, people would succumb to nihilism. I've talked about nihilism before in another video, so I won't go into depth here, but to give a brief explanation, nihilism is the belief in nothingness, a belief that rejects the idea of objective truth. According to Nietzsche, nihilism was a necessary step on the journey away from religion, but it wasn't the destination because it presented a very real problem. If people viewed life as having no inherent meaning, it would likely lead them to despair. Because of this, he sought to speed up the arrival of nihilism so that he could, in turn, speed up its departure. He believed that after nihilism had passed, humanity could finally arrive at the true philosophical foundation on which society could thrive. Unfortunately, while he successfully expedited nihilism's arrival, he failed to do so with its departure. In fact, Nietzsche's philosophy was taken up by many of the violent ideologies that defined the early 20th century. Well over 100 years later, nihilism remains rampant throughout global culture. Trust in both secular and religious institutions is at an all-time low. Our governments are corrupt, there are CEOs with more money than some countries, and our spiritual leaders often appear ineffective and out of touch. Most people today report that faith plays little to no role in their lives. Instead, we've begun looking to science and reason for answers, but these haven't been able to offer a sufficient solution to the problem of meaning either. So what are we to do? Should we just simply accept our fate, conclude that our lives are without purpose, and allow the boulder to roll back over us? Well, 20th century philosophers Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre didn't think so. Both argued that in the absence of objective meaning, we, as free and rational beings, must fight to create our own purpose. Sartre is credited as the father of modern existentialism, a philosophical school concerned with our plight as individuals forced to assume responsibility for our lives without certain knowledge of truth. Though its roots can be traced back to 19th century figures like Soren Kierkegaard and Fyodor Dostoevsky, Sartre differentiated himself by rejecting the idea that humans were reliant on an external power like God to provide us with meaning. He claimed that man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself, and referred to those who would outsource this responsibility to a higher power as acting in what he called bad faith. In Sartre's view, existence precedes essence. We are conceived, and only after being born do we figure out what our purpose in life will be. This might seem like an uncontroversial opinion to us today, but in the mid-20th century, this was a radical idea. For most of human history, it was assumed that essence precedes existence. Since the time of Plato and Aristotle, it was widely believed that our purpose as individuals was assigned to us before birth. The meaning of your life was ready-made by the gods, prepackaged before you were even born. Sartre's claim was a direct contradiction of this widely held belief, a declaration that we as humans aren't beholden to gods or kings to provide us with meaning, only to ourselves. For Sartre, the only problem of existence wasn't its lack of meaning, but rather its absolutely terrifying level of freedom. After all, without an objective meaning or morality, every one of us is responsible for designing our own purpose according to our own ethical code. Camus largely agreed with Sartre's diagnosis that we live in a meaningless universe where we as humans are, in his own words, abandoned to freedom. However, he didn't agree with the cure. To Camus, the solution to the problem of meaning wasn't as simple as making up your own. The universe would naturally rebuke our attempts to do so, no matter how hard we tried. We can push the boulder up the hill, but it will always fall back down. This, in turn, would still give rise to feelings of the absurd, as well as the associated sense of anxiety, alienation, and hopelessness that accompanies it. To Camus, there were only three possible reactions to this. The first of these is suicide, which Camus famously wrote is the one truly serious philosophical problem. Rather than grappling with the absurdity of life, you can simply refuse to play the game. The only issue is when you're gone, you can no longer enjoy life, however meaningless it may be. It also doesn't actually solve the problem, it only allows the absurd to decide your fate. It's essentially admitting defeat. The second possible reaction is the solution of faith, which Camus dubs philosophical suicide. Similar to Sartre's concept of bad faith, it's when a person rejects the burden of creating their own meaning by shifting the responsibility to an external ideology. This amounts to a kind of denial where the individual deludes themselves into thinking they've conquered the problem when, in reality, they're just avoiding it. It's simply an attempt to replace the absurd with a set of man-made beliefs, the consequence of which is the abdication of existential freedom. Importantly, Camus doesn't limit this to religion. Any ideological system can serve this function. Nationalism, capitalism, or even the values of our own family. When we allow external systems to dictate meaning to us, we give away the potential to determine our life's purpose. How many of us took a job or studied for a degree solely because our parents told us that we should? In a world as complicated and confusing as ours, it can be tempting to contract out our thinking and just go along with what we're told, but the risk of ruin we run in doing this is ending up in a situation where we're unhappy and unfulfilled. It's why many of us pause on that random Tuesday afternoon and ask ourselves, why am I doing any of this? If instead we make our own choices, we can decide meaning for ourselves and follow a path that calls to us instead of one that's just prescribed. Of course, there's no guarantee of success. In fact, according to Camus, you are destined to fail again and again. What he argues, though, is that this is the only true solution to the problem: to acknowledge the meaninglessness of life and continue living anyway. Or, as Camus puts it, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. The universe will always reject all attempts by the individual to create meaning. Just like Sisyphus, we're doomed to forever push the boulder up the hill, knowing that, no matter how hard we try, it will inevitably roll back down to the bottom. Yet, we must fight back against the absurd, because it is by virtue of our struggle that we empower ourselves to live life the way we want. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. This philosophy effectively rejects nihilism as nothing more than a stepping stone on the way to absurdism. Life is meaningless, sure, and the only rational course of action is to behave as such. There is no plan, no objective truth, and everything happens purely by accident. But this doesn't necessitate nihilism. If we instead choose to embrace the absurd, we can view our circumstances as an opportunity to change our perspective. Camus notes that it's not meaninglessness that hurts, rather it's the desire for meaning being continuously rejected. If we can put aside our desires and simply accept life for what it is, we open up ourselves to experiencing it fully, living as passionately and as intensely as we like. In a world without meaning, we are free to constantly invent and reinvent our life's purpose, changing it as often as it suits us. Today you may be stuck in a redundant, dead-end job, but tomorrow you could easily quit and go about completely redefining your existence. Maybe you want to be a chef or a classical composer. Maybe you want to spend the next year backpacking through the wilderness or volunteering with an aid organization. All you have to do is find the courage to acknowledge your own freedom, and you can be whoever you want to be. Knowing this, we can abandon any expectations for the future and instead choose to live in the present moment. It isn't necessary that our actions lead to something bigger. There's no goal we have to reach, no afterlife to prepare for. Then we can find joy in every situation, no matter how unpleasant or absurd, because, well, it doesn't really matter. Although we may be fated to fail, there's no reason we can't be happy while we do it. This might lead to greater empathy for our fellow humans as we recognize that every person alive is fighting the same fight that we are. We can feel a sense of camaraderie in knowing that we're all in this together. We'll never make it to the top of the mountain, the meaning of our lives will forever elude us, but as Camus says, the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. It's because of this that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. You find yourself walking down the street with your morning coffee in hand as your brain is flooded with the dozens of issues and problems you need to deal with. Maybe it's a relationship that's on the rocks, a pet that needs to go to the vet, but you know that paying that bill means you might be short on rent this month. Or the fact that the very coffee you're drinking is probably going to keep you up all night worrying, but you kinda have to drink it anyway or else you can't survive the day. You're working a job you hate just so you can make ends meet. You're experiencing an existential crisis, and it's in moments like this that we start to question everything we've been taught about life. Why are we doing any of this? Like Sisyphus in Greek mythology, life feels like we're forced to push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll right back down. How can we live a life of meaning when it feels like nothing in the world makes any sense? If you find yourself grappling with these questions, there are different philosophies that can help provide answers. The first is Existentialism, which challenges you to embrace your newfound freedom and use it to create meaning amidst life's unending uncertainties. highlighted by philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Soren Kierkegaard, existentialism never truly found its way to mainstream acceptance until the emergence of the 20th century philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Through Sartre, we've come to understand existentialism as a way to confront life and its fundamental absurdity. It's a belief that urges us to embrace our individuality and forge our own paths in defiance of an indifferent universe. You'll see more of what Sartre meant by his words that open this video as we get further along in outlining what all these isms mean in our lives. To fully grasp existentialism, we'll first need to examine the teachings of Plato and Aristotle. Both believed an individual is born with attributes intrinsically linked to that person's identity, which they deemed to be their essence. Even objects we share this universe with, like trees, possess an essence. A tree has roots, a trunk, branches, and leaves. Although many kinds of trees exist, these qualities define an individual tree's essence, which makes it very different from every other tree on the planet. Essentialists like Plato and Aristotle believed that essence exists before we're even born. For example, essentialists from the industrial age will tell you that the essence of a man is in his role as a provider and protector, even though many today no longer believe that to be true. Similarly, on a cultural scale, essence plays a significant role around the world. In Japan, the concept of omotenashi, or serving others wholeheartedly, is a form of essence. Essence gives us a purpose. It's the idea that something exists outside of us that we have to live up to. We are tasked with living up to that purpose, and it's something we always seem to be in search of. The world operated under this belief for a large part of human history, thanks to institutions like religion and tradition. But while these beliefs are based on the idea that essence comes before existence, existentialists believe the opposite, that existence precedes essence. They believe that we come into this world with no predetermined purpose, and that we have the freedom to define what our essence is on our own terms. A figure like Prince Harry from the British royal family represents existentialism in an interesting way. Born into what many would consider a strong and unbreakable essence, he decided to walk away from that life in pursuit of freedom and love. Redefining his life outside of the confines of royalty, his decision mirrors the existentialist principle that freedom comes with a profound level of responsibility. Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. This quote from Sartre highlights an important aspect of the existentialist plight. Everyone is fully accountable for their choices, therefore we must confront the consequences of our actions. Existentialism asserts that individuals aren't bound by societal or religious norms. In other words, you don't have to subscribe to the meaning given by society's figures of authority. You might suddenly realize that your teacher's sense of meaning is pointless, as is that of your parents and even the leaders of the country in which you live. Why should you listen to them when they don't get to determine your essence? It sounds tempting to be completely free from the shackles of society, but being an existentialist almost means accepting the consequences that come as a result of rebelling against conventional authority. On the flip side, if you choose to live according to a predetermined rulebook for life, you are living in bad faith. Deciding to quit your hectic construction job in exchange for your artistic passions is a worthwhile pursuit. However, when you face struggles from a lack of stability, you'll need to charge head-on, understanding the consequences of freedom. If you instead choose to remain at that job despite it being unfulfilling, you'll be living in bad faith. At the core, existentialists believe that whatever meaning you find in life, you must determine on your own. Do you genuinely enjoy accounting? Go for it, that's your meaning. Are you only doing this job because you're scared of being a failed artist? That's bad faith. Existentialism isn't the magical answer to life's alienating and questionable problems. What it does is present a type of authenticity that makes you an active participant in life. This shift in mentality is an important step towards fulfillment in the modern world. It's also closely connected with the absurd, but it treats this absurdity with a sense of agency, urging individuals to confront it head-on. We are encouraged to engage with the absurd in pursuit of meaning and authenticity. While existentialism grapples with an individual's search for meaning in an indifferent universe, absurdism takes things a step further. Why should you search for meaning when existence itself is absurd? To an absurdist, life is inherently meaningless, and so every attempt to find meaning or purpose is futile. Absurdism embraces the inherent contradictions of life without succumbing to nihilism or despair. Rather than seeking to discover meaning or purpose, absurdism encourages individuals to confront their existence with defiance. Albert Camus, a 20th century philosopher, believed in absurdism as a form of philosophical rebellion against humanity's search for meaning. Much of history centers on a belief in an ultimate answer that will provide a sense of relief to life's unending cruelty. For a figure like Camus, the absurd emerges as an answer to nihilism's despair, and a humbling truth to existentialism's demand for meaning. Camus wrote, "The absurd is the essential concept and the first truth. Much like taking the red pill in the Matrix, acknowledging the absurd is seen as the first step to living in reality. Do you get extremely self-critical after falling short on personal goals you have set for yourself? In the eyes of an absurdist, there's no point to that despair. After all, you can find freedom in the fact that it's all ultimately meaningless." This newfound insight can be a powerful push towards healthier, more detached thoughts. For an existentialist, finding your own meaning might feel satisfying, but to an absurdist, true freedom exists in rejecting the concept of meaning. What happens when an existentialist's meaning is scrutinized, challenged, and broken down? In absurdism, meaning is a futile endeavor when life flaunts its indifference without warning. Existentialism offers a compelling response to absurdism. Instead of choosing to cave into despair, it encourages us to actively engage with life. After all, authenticity, self-awareness, and a pursuit of meaning are core tenets of this philosophy. While absurdism may lead to total apathy from a lack of passion, existentialism tasks us with taking ownership of our lives. Even when things don't go the way you might have intended, it's important to avoid falling into an autopilot routine. If you suddenly lost your dream home in a fire, absurdists might question why you were ever attached to that home in the first place. With existentialism, you are challenged to acknowledge the pain of loss while recognizing the significance of your attachments. Losing a home is undeniably tragic, but we are encouraged to find meaning in response to this adversity. That quest for meaning can lead to a deeper appreciation for your bond with your loved ones. Existentialism lets you dig deeper when it seems like all hope is lost. In many ways, it's a celebration of the indomitable human spirit. Meaning can be found anywhere and everywhere, and as an existentialist, you have the choice and ability to find purpose and fulfillment no matter what. Should we really do anything about life's inherent lack of meaning? Why react in the first place? Existentialism is often at odds with nihilism. It's no surprise, as nihilism is the warmest embrace one can give to life's hopelessness. While an absurdist advocates for defiance of life's absurdity, a nihilist doubles down on its meaninglessness, adopting despair towards life. Although existentialists must find a meaning of their own, for nihilists, nothing comes next once the meaninglessness is acknowledged. Life is meaningless, so we must act accordingly. Nihilism is often associated with the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. While he was never a strong advocate for this philosophy, Nietzsche presented nihilism as a consequence to the death of traditional values. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. To Nietzsche, losing the once default belief in God presents a predicament that ultimately leads to nihilistic thoughts. You can think of nihilism as the default state of humanity when God and the premise of a supreme being are out of the picture. While nihilism is rooted in despair, certain aspects of this concept provide insightful reflections. In fact, there's an active or optimistic type of nihilism that exists. Optimistic nihilism challenges conventional values, seeing the removal of traditional meanings as an opportunity to sprout new moral and cultural horizons. Nietzsche believed this to be a potentially liberating view, as it opened doors to value based on collective and personal will. Optimistic nihilism exists in our world, and it manifests in some interesting ways. A figure like Elon Musk, who claims to have read Nietzsche at age 14, represents this philosophy quite well. Even if his personal opinions are questionable, his outside-of-the-box approach to technology and space exploration challenges old wisdom and expectations. SpaceX is a company that revolutionized the cost of space exploration. Many people would avoid taking on a government-backed organization like NASA, especially when so much of the science is locked behind classified information. With optimistic nihilism, one unlocks the ability to push significant boundaries that were left untouched due to strong, long-established beliefs. While everyone else might be scared to pull the 100-year-old curtain back, a nihilist realizes that giving power to such a belief doesn't help anyone. If there's a monster on the other side, the fear ends. If there is no monster, the fear ends. At its core, existentialism offers a distinct perspective in response to nihilism. Although the universe doesn't offer an inherent meaning, existentialists believe that we have a capacity to live a defined and fulfilling life with our choices and actions. Existentialism acknowledges our potential for personal growth, ethical engagement, and a meaningful existence in a universe that lacks an objective meaning. It's a celebration of our freedom to shape our lives and identities. With this philosophy, we can fully advocate for our confrontation of modern existential dilemmas. Existentialism, absurdism, and nihilism all accept life's meaninglessness, but each of them provides very different responses to this meaninglessness. To explain this difference, picture yourself trapped in solitary confinement. Absurdism teaches you to stop looking for meaning in your suffering and to instead laugh in the face of your captors. In the myth of Sisyphus, pushing a boulder uphill seems like a futile punishment, but each defiant attempt brings a sense of fulfillment. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Nihilism teaches you to do nothing. It's all meaninglessness. Your imprisonment, your defiance, your search for meaning, none of it matters. You would most likely find a nihilist lying in bed waiting for the end to come. Life's inherent lack of meaning renders them detached. They are resigned to the inevitability of existence without a desire to engage in introspection or defiance. Existentialism teaches you to take this experience as an opportunity for self-reflection and personal evolution. Each moment in confinement becomes a canvas upon which you may create meaning and even improve your identity. By embracing your mental freedom, you can seek out purpose even in the face of adversity. This mentality can lead to some powerful results. Throughout his 27-year imprisonment during South Africa's apartheid regime, Nelson Mandela committed to meaning in the form of human dignity and the rights of every individual, regardless of race. This commitment reflects the existentialist theme of finding meaning through personal struggles. In the end, this enduring belief is what helped Mandela eventually reshape the future of his country. An existentialist mindset was key to keeping himself together, holding on to his core sense of meaning until his eventual release. Existentialism allows us to embrace individuality at its core. Even if life has no meaning, there's still a strong and often unexpected beauty in what we're able to create from the rubble of life's absurdity. As an existentialist, your life has meaning the moment you decide to create one. It's like the ultimate cheat code against apathy and despair. Instead of succumbing to the void, the act of living transforms into an art form. By embracing existentialism, you can confront life's inherent uncertainties, while also transforming them into opportunities to pursue personal growth. The next time you're faced with a tough decision and that overwhelming feeling dawns upon you, remember that you have the freedom to create your own meaning. If the pressure of getting a job is clouding your mind, it might be time to ask yourself what really matters. Take some time to reflect, ponder your next steps, prioritize what makes a meaningful life in your heart, and decide for yourself what your life should be. Once you feel like you've figured it out, you can begin to live authentically. Even if you're working in a field you lack passion for, you should work knowing that you intend to change things soon. Never succumb to bad faith, and you'll be able to take on life's absurdity with a head held high.
Life is hard. I bought a new pair of shoes the other day, walked outside into the rain, and ended up stepping into some mud. Now they're ruined, and I'm bitter. But then I took a step back. Not literally, of course, but I really thought about it. And I came to the conclusion that nothing in life really matters. Here's why. The Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. One day, humans became a thing, and we became conscious. This world seemed perfect for us. It wasn't scorching hot, it wasn't deathly cold. We fit right in the middle. The gravity on Earth was perfect. It allowed us to move and run and catch animals that conveniently existed for us humans to eat. There was water to drink, there was oxygen to breathe. It's as if we were put here for a reason. We began creating things. We began working together as a species, building empires, covering the planet, and fighting each other for whatever reason. Fast forward a couple million years, and here we are today. Computers, rockets, Elon Musk, they're all here. Somewhere along the line, we also, in a way, created something out of nothing. It's called time. We've laid out definitions of time, seconds, minutes, hours, years, but it doesn't really matter. We made those for our own use. Time is nothing more than a way to measure the passing of events. But we've only really set up these units of time based off of ourselves. A day is how long it takes the Earth to spin around once. A month is about how long it takes the moon to orbit the Earth, and also spin around once. A year is how long it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun once. You get about 78 Earth revolutions around the Sun in this journey called life. As poetic as that sounds, there's not much scale to these things once we pass a human lifetime. Sure, we can judge how long 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 years are. But after that, the timescales of things are just too much for our brains to handle. As much as you think you understand the 13.8 billion year lifespan of the universe, you really can't put that into an imaginable scale. On the scale of a human life, the universe is unbelievably old. But in terms of the universe's lifespan, pretty much nothing has happened yet. it's barely even started. We can make predictions about the next hundreds of trillions of years of the universe's life. We can figure out how and when our sun is going to blow up. We can figure out when our galaxy is going to collide with another. We can come up with theories that describe why the universe we've been put into is expanding faster than anything else physically possible. But yet, we have zero idea what happened in the fraction of a second between when there was nothing and when there was something. For some reason, as far as we can tell, we're the only conscious beings to have ever existed. But we don't even know what being conscious is. We developed consciousness only to be aware of the fact that nothing else is. We've grown so aware of our surroundings that the smarter we get, the smaller we become. As this thing we call time goes on, we begin to realize things. Things that prove that the universe probably wasn't made just for us. You were most likely born in a hospital. If not, props to you for making it this far. Back then, you were your parents' entire world for a small time, which is cute, but you aren't everything. 360,000 people are born each day. Of all of those people with the same birthday, some are going to do big things and change the world. Others are just gonna die. That just happens. But Earth is just one planet. In our solar system, there's 8. Or 9 of those. For now, for life as we know it to exist, it's kinda hard to believe that there might be other life out there. It takes so much to happen for us to be able to exist. We've discovered over 4,000 exoplanets to date, planets that don't revolve around our sun, and we've found multiple examples of Earth-like planets. Roughly the same shape, size, temperature, but yet there's nothing there from what we can tell. So if there are so many planets that could have life, why haven't we seen it yet? Why are there no signs? Well, we're just one solar system in an entire galaxy. There's over 200 billion stars in our galaxy alone. But that's just one galaxy. We're a part of the Local Group, which is a collection of 30 galaxies near our own. Andromeda is one of them. That's the one that's going to collide with our galaxy in about 4.5 billion years. By then, you'll be long gone. And soon after that, so will the Earth. The Sun at this point will be reaching the end of its life. It's going to expand in size, and by the end, it will completely consume the Earth, shining over 3,000 times brighter than it does today. But even though our home planet will be gone, the rest of the galaxy wouldn't even notice. Billions of years on a multi-trillion year timescale is truly nothing. But even so, there are some things that we're observing in the universe's infancy today that will drastically influence the far future. To keep it short, the universe is expanding. This is nothing new. A lot of people know this, but what many people don't know is that this expansion is speeding up. Now, we don't know why, but we have an idea of what's causing it. Dark energy. I made an entire video about this, so go watch that after. This dark energy is stretching the fabric of space-time. We don't know what it's made from. We know it's there, we observe its results, but we don't know exactly what it is, or what it's going to do. Dark energy, at least according to our current calculations, will eventually stretch the space-time between galaxies faster than the speed of light. The light emitting from our neighboring galaxies will travel towards us at the fastest speed possible, but even this won't be enough. The light will never reach us because the space between it is stretching faster than the light that is traveling through it. It will spread the universe so thin with galaxies that when we look out to observe what's around us, we won't see anything. We're going to end up all alone, confined to whatever galaxy we end up in. But in the end, even our galaxy will start to go dark. The fate of the sun is the same as it is for all stars in the universe. Eventually, trillions of years down the road, these lights in the sky are going to begin turning off, one by one by one. Without any new stars to keep things running, the universe is going to get a bit colder. Depending on their size, these dying stars begin to turn into white dwarfs or neutron stars, providing the last glimmers of light in a cold and dark universe. This is the very last hope for any surviving life forms in the universe. But eventually, trillions of more years after the last stars like our sun die, even these white dwarfs will begin to dim out. Some of these neutron stars roaming throughout the universe may collide by chance, resulting in the brightest known events in the entire universe: supernovae. But once these supernovae conclude, the universe is again plunged into darkness. All matter that used to make up the galaxies we see today will begin to fall into the black holes that kept things held together for so long. The Big Bang that created the highest temperatures ever known to physics ultimately results in the most dormant, dark, and cold configuration possible. From a universe teeming with light and beauty, to a cold, barren wasteland. A universe dominated by black holes. But even now, the universe has just begun. These black holes are going to be around for a while, and the things we used to call galaxies, with stars and planets and life, are now just going to be full of black holes, and more black holes. This is how the universe is going to spend most of its time. Cold, dark, and alone. We're no longer talking about millions of years here. The timescales are now on quadrillions of years. But even these black holes won't last forever. Through Hawking radiation, these black holes will slowly, very slowly, begin to evaporate away, one subatomic particle at a time, until eventually, after all the black holes fade out of existence, there is nothing left in the universe. A universe where nothing changes, where time becomes pointless. There's nothing. The nothingness of space, though, will continue to expand because of dark energy, a force that accounts for 70% of our universe that we don't even completely understand yet. Matter as we know it today, the things that make up everything you see, only accounts for barely 4% of the stuff in the universe. So maybe, just maybe, we're a fluke. We were never supposed to make it to the end, but we still have a role to play out today. We are one species on one planet, in one galaxy, in an almost indistinguishable part of the universe. Whether or not we came to exist, not much would be different. Every day we matter a little less, and a little less, until eventually we realize that, in the grand scheme of things, we don't matter at all. Our galaxy could just disappear. It wouldn't really change much. We came to exist in such a weird time, but it's also pretty unique. We know we're just the beginning, a blip in the universe's potential, but the only way to fulfill that potential is to start making progress today. It's not a stretch to say that there won't be others like us, random spurts of intelligent life spread throughout trillions of years. But now, we're at one of those stages where life is possible, and probably the easiest it's ever going to be. You get one life to do whatever you want. There are some things you can avoid, like school, or taxes. But other than that, you're free to do mostly whatever you'd like. If we can't figure out our purpose for coming to exist on this planet, if we can't figure out why or how the universe came into being, then our purpose is whatever we want it to be. If you want to sit around and play games all day, there are people doing that. If you want to build a multi-billion-dollar company that's going to help propel humanity to other worlds, there are people doing that as well. Anything you want to be or do can be done, and should be done. Like I said, our own purpose is whatever we want. Right now, if good things are happening to you, if bad things are happening to you, it's actually not gonna last forever. You have zero idea what the future holds for you, and the most random of experiences can reroute your future in an instant. Everyone was dealt a hand in life that we honestly just didn't ask for. Some people's hands are better than others, but we all have to play with the cards we've been given in the best way we can. There's a chance that we humans may never figure out why everything in the universe acts the way it does. Is there life anywhere else, or are we the exception? For every answer, 100 new questions pop up. There's infinite possibilities as to how we came to exist, but there's infinitely just as many things to do while we're figuring that out. There's dogs to feed, there's people to meet, there's science to be done. So whatever you do while we figure out our spot in the universe, this universe at least, just try to enjoy it. Because no matter what happens to you, no matter how many times you mess up, no matter how far humanity ventures out into the unknown, in the end, it doesn't even matter.
God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? This passage, written by Friedrich Nietzsche, poses a fascinating question. What do we do when we no longer find meaning in our religions and long-standing traditions? What do we do when the very foundations of society have been broken? How do we overcome the void that nihilism leaves behind? Nihilism is the belief that life has no meaning, that morals and values don't exist, and that all of the structures and institutions we seem destined to live by aren't real. You don't have to care about anything because nothing matters. At first, the idea of nihilism is liberating. Some might even say it's comforting. Imagine waking up without that feeling of the weight of the world being on your shoulders, or going to bed without feeling like you've let everyone around you down. You're no longer bound by religion, moral codes, or sacred traditions. You're free to live life on your own terms because, at the end of the day, nothing matters. The philosophy of nihilism was popularized by 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, but contrary to what people think, he didn't want a nihilistic society, but instead he believed nihilism was necessary to break down the institutions of morality of the time and to allow something new to take place. In a sense, to allow us to become gods. His philosophy was that we need to overcome nihilism, not get stuck in it. He believed that the world has no order or structure except what we give to it. Essentially, what we think about the world is what is. So, if we believe that nothing matters and that life has no meaning, then we're destined to live in a world void of meaning, community, relationships, or anything else we might value. He felt that the effects of this philosophical approach would destroy any conviction society had, and we would see a full-blown crisis of humanity. Some of that came to pass in the 20th century after he died, when themes of nihilism were resonating with artists, social critics, and philosophers. The second half of the 20th century was defined in part by anti-foundationalism, an attitude of indifference to social structures, business, and what some might have called the man. By the 2000s, a mood of gloom, anxiety, anger, and despair had taken hold and has, in many ways, had a grip on us ever since. And still people turn to nihilism, not to feel despair, but to try and find an answer to the question we all have. Why? The world, its problems, and our questions and worries about it can feel infinite. It's overwhelming, but nihilism offers an opportunity to feel insignificant within it all, to feel like you don't matter because none of it matters. There's endless freedom in that. It allows us to feel indifferent about things that would otherwise occupy our attention 24/7. The world doesn't affect us, and therefore we don't affect the world. Politics doesn't matter, hardship doesn't matter. But the challenge with nihilism and the problem that Nietzsche was unable to solve is that at the same time, that means friendships don't matter. Family doesn't matter, love, happiness, none of it matters. If we fall too far down the nihilism rabbit hole, we start to feel a sense of loss. Loss of the things that bring us joy in a world that's already hard to live in, and loss of our own selves. Embracing nihilism is understandable and sometimes helpful, but it can create a loss of purpose and motivation in our lives. That sense of indifference about the world means we're also indifferent about our lives and the path we want to take. This makes us feel emptiness and despair about who and what we are. It can lead to destructive behavior. If nothing has meaning, then our actions don't have consequences. We end up not feeling any sort of personal responsibility for what we do, even if we do bad things. Nihilism also makes it very hard to establish an ethical framework. It questions the very existence of morals, values, and ethics. And without these, there aren't really any universal principles to bond us all. Sure, we don't have to agree on everything, but if we stop trying to be good people and caring about others, society will fall apart. It means we become disconnected from not just strangers, but also the people closest to us. Nihilism questions the mere existence of relationships and institutions. Essentially, it challenges community. It fosters a feeling of detachment. Sure, not all institutions are good, but many are important to how we build our lives. We go to school to learn, but also to socialize. We play pickup basketball at the local park to exercise, but also to socialize. We go to places of worship to perform our religious practices, but also, you guessed it, to socialize. Because at the end of the day, we're social animals, and community is one of the most important things in living a long and healthy life. These actions that we use to bond with others are also teaching us empathy. Humans are the only species that are able to understand and experience without living it. We have empathy for others. If nihilism asks us to get rid of that empathy, it is not only asking us to let go of a vital part of ourselves, but it's also creating cracks in our social cohesion. This is the destruction that Nietzsche was worried about. He dedicated his life to understanding nihilism. He saw it as the result of the people's frustrations while searching for meaning and purpose in religion. Nietzsche was writing about this after the Enlightenment, when people started questioning the religious principles that had guided society for so long. Suddenly, the age-old purpose of living for God didn't hold meaning anymore, because people stopped believing in God. The collapse in meaning also meant a collapse in purpose. Whether we like it or not, purpose in our life often comes from suffering and pain, things Nietzsche felt were essential to experience to live a profound life. He told us it was out of the deepest depth that the highest must come to its height. Nietzsche wanted to turn nihilism around. He believed that if we survived a takeover of nihilistic principles, we could discover the correct course for humankind. In this sense, nihilism is a transitional stage of life that needs to be overcome to find meaning in why we suffer. However, Nietzsche also believed that not everyone has it in them to overcome nihilism. Passive nihilists, as he called them, would never find meaning in the world. Their approach to life embraces a feeling of nothingness and despair. This, unfortunately, often leads people towards mass movements that like to tell them what to believe. Cults, political parties, and religious groups give passive nihilists an easy way out. On the other hand, active nihilists might recognize their purposeless existence and strive to work their way out of it. This can look like destroying old values and constructing new ones that are meaningful to how you see the world in your own personal evolution. Think of a piece of stone, meaningless when it is just plopped in front of you, but if you start chiseling away at it, day after day, you can create a spear, a statue, or jewelry and give it purpose and meaning. Of course, we don't always get the stone plopped in front of us. It can be hard to figure out where to start looking for that meaning. We might not be born with a single passion or life purpose, but if we allow ourselves to feel our suffering, difficulty, and pain, we can get an idea of what we want from life. If we envy a friend who has been practicing tennis day after day and finally wins a competition, maybe that's a sign we should try tennis or even just pick up a new hobby. If we see people suffering in our community, we can turn our sadness into action by volunteering at a local soup kitchen. When we study our emotions, we find meaning, and we can overcome the despair that nihilism might cause us. But how do we know when we've overcome it? Well, imagine you were told you had to live your exact life repeatedly. If you're okay with that, despite the hardship, you're not viewing your life or the world in a nihilistic way. You've learned to celebrate life as a miracle and embrace every piece of it, even when it doesn't seem great. Nietzsche has a metaphor of a shepherd and a snake. The snake had crawled into the shepherd's throat, and at first he's choking on the snake. But then he bites its head off to save his own life. He spits out the head and allows the pain to be a part of him so that he can continue living. He takes control of the despair and the pain. When we allow others to dictate things for us, it doesn't feel good. We want to be in touch with our feelings and tackle our problems from a place of purpose. Nihilism doesn't let us do that. It leaves us, instead, susceptible to being controlled by others. The good news is that although Nietzsche thought that once the Enlightenment happened and God became less relevant, people would spiral into a catatonic nihilistic state, they didn't. So now, even if nihilism feels like an enticing philosophy to embrace, it won't be the end of society as we know it. And in fact, if we play our cards right, it might help us. By removing something like God or government from being a central figure in our existence, we take the attention off the sole meaning of our life and put it on something bigger. Maybe our one life doesn't hold all the meaning we thought it would, and maybe that's okay. The author Wendy Seifert wrote a book arguing that a meaningless life could make us happy. Some principles of nihilism can be a savior for the current state of hyper-individualism, a cure for our obsession to find meaning in everything from what job you have to what you eat for dinner. She coined the term sunny nihilism, which suggests a chance to enjoy the moment, even if it's chaotic. And even if it doesn't feel meaningful, the odds of us just being alive are worth making the most of it. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Have you ever met someone who calls himself a nihilist? Maybe you have a friend from college or a family member who says they're a disciple of Nietzsche. At every opportunity, they love to wax poetic about the meaninglessness of life. Briefly indulging them in their philosophical ideas can expand your mind and help you to see things you never would have. But the truth is, outside of philosophical discussion, leading a nihilistic life is bleak. Think about it, if nothing matters and we're all just specks of dust floating through space and time, what's the point in trying at all? Building healthy relationships with friends and family doesn't seem worth it because in the end, everyone you know will die anyway. All attempts at self-improvement are futile because in the universe's grand plan, none of it matters. Even if you're not all doom and gloom, there will be days when getting out of bed will seem pointless, where life itself will seem kinda pointless. And the current state of the world, with issues like the climate crisis, the rise in extreme politics, and economic instability, doesn't help with our psychological state. This glimpse into the void might dissuade you from wanting to do anything with your life. You're staring down nihilism, the belief in nothing. And framed like this, it makes life sound pretty awful. But there's another way to look at nihilism, one that teaches you not to see the glass as half full or half empty, but instead to throw the glass away and drink straight from the faucet until you're satisfied. This is optimistic nihilism, the realization that the universe's meaninglessness is the most liberating thing in the world. It's the type of nihilism you get when standing on the precipice of a huge mountain or watching a mother bird feed her young. It's the profound smack of insignificance you feel when faced with the miracle of your existence. The amount of luck and chance that it took for you to get here in the first place. Optimistic nihilism doesn't mean we're doomed to live in a meaningless universe. Instead, it allows us to experience the universe in our own unique ways. According to the nihilist, you and I don't matter. Nothing does. Religious morality or societal norms don't restrict your existence. You are entirely free and in control of making your life mean something. Once you accept the meaninglessness of your life as a gift rather than a burden, you find peace with the life you have. Because life is brief and fleeting, it's precious. Writing in the late 19th century, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was worried about modernity. He was very critical of the traditional European morality and the religion of his time, which placed Christian beliefs at the center of social and political life. In his 1882 book, The Gay Science, he proclaimed the infamous line, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." Here Nietzsche didn't make an argument for atheism. Instead, he observed that believing in one true Christian God was no longer central to European society. People's lives no longer revolved around the church's calendar or teachings. Industrial means production gripped Europe, flooding the pockets of factory owners and enforcing a standardized workday on everyone else. With that, personal freedom and agency became core values in society. People no longer yearned for a higher power to guide them through life, explain what comes after death, or show them right from wrong. Increasingly, people took these matters into their own hands. While Nietzsche was critical of religion, he was equally skeptical of what society could become without it. He understood that without Christianity as a guiding principle, people might move through life confused and disorientated. A world without God creates a void of understanding in our lives, and humans aren't psychologically capable of a pure belief in nothing. We're always searching for purpose in anything, even when we're not aware of it. Think about how you start your day. Imagine you wake up and look out your window to see a beautiful owl perched on your balcony railing. You might associate that with having a good or bad day depending on the culture you were raised in. We're constantly making connections and associations like this in our lives down to the most mundane things. People aren't built to remain in a constant nihilistic state. It's only a phase that allows us to gain perspective on the structures that govern our everyday life. According to Nietzsche, we fill the void where God once was with ourselves. We become our own tiny gods, so to speak. We give ourselves the authority to distinguish right from wrong and determine our individual meanings in life. If nihilism from a Nietzschean point of view interests you, we made an entire video on nihilism, so you can check that out by clicking on the link in the description. The existentialists who came after Nietzsche, like French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, expanded on this idea. To Sartre, we have complete freedom over our lives in a world without God or objective meaning, but with great power comes great responsibility. You have the power to shape the life you want to live. Let that sink in for a moment. Yes, you can make good choices for yourself, but how are you supposed to know which choices are good, and how often do you do things that are against your own self-interest? In good moments when things are going well for you, you might feel empowered and in control. You may get the promotion you deserve or marry the person you love. You might move to a new city and establish a community of friends that you couldn't imagine life without. You've invested time, energy, and love into making a meaningful life for yourself without following arbitrary rules or some intangible plan ordained from above. All the good things in your life have come from you. Yet, in the trenches of the everyday, life can seem overwhelming, especially when you're in charge of making sure you have a good one. To give our lives meaning, we create internal narratives about ourselves, and this is where we start to run into issues. We tell ourselves we're hard workers, and consequently the importance of our jobs and the identity they provide us with start to weigh us down. It's the same at school. Students get sick with anxiety about test scores and grades as if getting into the perfect college will finally confirm their life's worth. Similarly, you inject meaning into your love and family life. You strive to be the perfect parent, child, or partner because of your belief that these relationships will make your life meaningful. This is what keeps people in unhealthy or toxic relationships. They've attached this idea of meaning or worth to something that's ultimately meaningless. Having to constantly reaffirm who you are because there's no higher power to do that work for you can be exhausting. While we have the freedom of total control, it also bogs us down. What happens when you're busy shaping the life you think you want, yet you're still unhappy? All this meaning making, trying to make sense of your life, contributes to a plague of depression and anxiety, especially among millennials and Gen Z. People are burned out, stressed out, and exhausted. So why do we chase meaning? Even with this feeling in the back of our minds that none of it matters, there's a contradiction between our pursuit of meaning and the reality of a meaningless universe. It's devastating to confront the idea that all the hard work we put into making our lives mean something is for nothing. Optimistic nihilism is the solution to this anxiety that we inherit when we're forced into the position of making meaning out of our lives. Yes, nothing matters, but isn't that a relief? You can find yourself responding to the seemingly urgent work emails at 3 a.m. or over-obsessing over your Instagram caption, but in the moment, it feels like the weight of the world rests on these things. You spend late nights tossing and turning, all of your mistakes and wrongdoing spinning, until you've convinced yourself that you're the worst person on the planet. But embracing that none of these things ultimately matter is freeing. Forgive yourself for your past mistakes and look forward, excited to experience the future. When we're the center of our own structures of meaning, every choice we make, good or bad, becomes weighted with significance. When you find yourself in one of these mindsets where your life feels too big to handle, remind yourself that you're small and insignificant. The universe isn't different to your worries, struggles, and mistakes, and in the end, none of it matters. You'll die one day, and in the future, no one will remember your brief flight on this planet. There's no use fretting about trying to create the perfect life, because the energy spent making your life mean something is worthless. When it's all said and done, you're dust. It's completely normal to allow the squirming sensation of your insignificance to wash over you for a moment, but staring nihilism in the face is only uncomfortable if you let it be. If you call yourself an optimistic nihilist, it's probably good practice to confront all the different emotions your meaninglessness makes you feel. Otherwise, you won't reap the actual benefits of optimistic nihilism. Instead, it'll be a bandage to your problems, something you just tell yourself to believe in order to get through the day instead of a true guiding principle. You need to sit with your nothingness and accept it for what it is. Then use the objective meaninglessness of life to relieve yourself from the pressure that meaning-making entails. Take a look at your life and all it means to you, your relationships, the values you hold close, the things that get you out of bed in the morning. You have to be willing to part with all of them and embrace the void that they leave behind. Suddenly, the choices you make are the problems you face every day. Things that take up so much of your mental capacity don't seem so overbearing. Optimistic nihilism frees you from the crushing burden of meaning-making. Of course, it doesn't absolve you of wrongdoing. Your actions still have consequences, and you shouldn't give in to all your impulses for the sake of it. Continue creating a life that you love, one that you're excited to live, whatever that means. But just know that in the end, everything you've made will dissolve into the ether and you'll leave nothing behind. In the face of this reality, take advantage of all the sweetness life offers. The good things in your life are made all the more beautiful because of their fleeting insignificance. Sharing a meal with those you love, the smell of blooming lilacs in spring, and even petting your cat. It's such a miracle that you're here, able to experience anything. So shouldn't you spend your life enjoying yourself instead of worrying so much about making your life mean something? Life is precious, beautiful, and awe-inspiring, despite its chaos and disorder. It's a wonder that you can find goodness amid a void of meaning. You need to end the hopeless search of meaning-making and dive headfirst into the void. And when you emerge on the other side, you'll find nothing. But that nothing will be clear and bright, a guiding light into a better, yet fleeting life.
Nihilism is becoming dangerously popular, and it's no longer just in philosophy classrooms or those weird subreddits. It's in the way millions of real people are talking about life itself.
Why is nihilism so taboo? Why? Like, genuinely, none of this shit fucking matters. Like, none of it fucking matters.
We are the generation that is waking up to the myth of the American dream.
I think Gen Z is dubbed the nihilist generation because they feel that they have wasted their time and their money pursuing a degree that we were told to pursue, and it's amounting to nothing.
We're all gonna die. None of this shit fucking matters.
Everywhere you look, it seems like people have completely given up and are now questioning if there's any reason to get up in the morning, and beyond that, they're questioning existence and life itself. This is terrifying. Because if enough people start to believe that nothing matters, morality, purpose, and hope begin to disappear, and at the end of that road is complete societal collapse. And as someone who has always been interested in philosophy and has studied nihilism extensively over the years, I was intrigued with this modern resurgence, so I spent the last few months studying everything I could about nihilism to try and figure out why nihilism is taking over our modern society. And the results that I found were very strange, because although at the end of nihilism is complete societal collapse, that might not be as bad as it sounds. When trying to understand nihilism holistically, we run into some problems. The first is that the concept is ambiguous. It can refer to a lack of belief or ideology, and it can also refer to this lack of ideology as an ideology. That's the difference between someone being disillusioned and rejecting a belief system and someone choosing to embrace nothingness as a belief system. One is passive in their nihilism, and the other is active. The word applies to both of these positions. Now, the concept of nihilism isn't actually that old. Its creation is credited to several authors, such as the Swiss physician and philosopher Jacob Hermann Obereit. In his book, Jacob criticized Immanuel Kant's theory of knowledge, referring to it as nihilism. The German philosopher Friedrich Jacobi is most commonly credited with the origin of its philosophical use. In a letter, he derisively referred to Johann Gottlieb Fichte's German idealism as a form of nihilism. In either case, the word is used to negatively characterize a philosophical position. It's like a bad word in the same way philosophers would use the word solipsism, which refers to the belief that only you exist. If your philosophy is being characterized by either word, you might be in trouble. Nihilism as a concept became more widely known in the 19th century when it took on a political dimension. The last time you voted, you probably didn't notice a candidate for the nihilism party on your ballot. Political nihilism isn't a movement so much as it's a way of characterizing a political attitude. It was often used to discredit extreme political ideology and anti-establishment movements. In Russia, so-called political nihilism exploded in the 19th century. These were socialist and anarchist movements that were quickly gaining in popularity. Critics of these movements routinely referred to them as nihilism in order to dismiss them. In general, nihilism was used to slander any political group that was deemed threatening to the status quo. It was largely used by conservatives at the time. One such critic was the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. He once belonged to a socialist group, but was apprehended by the authorities and sentenced to death by the Russian Tsar. However, the author was released right before his execution and sentenced instead to years in a labor camp. After his near-death experience, Dostoevsky rejected socialism and other revolutionary causes. He felt they ignored the dignity of humanity and our need for individual freedoms. From his experience working in a labor camp, he yearned to feel the fruits of his labor that he sorely lacked in confinement. He strongly felt that socialism would similarly rob humans of experiencing the rewards of their work. In the setting of crime and punishment, he puts on display the way radical change leaves people behind. The people are poor and destitute, while the revolutionary-minded are uncaring of their plight. Political nihilism, more broadly, can be summarized as the belief that the current political establishment is corrupt and needs to be destroyed. Modern populism is a form of political nihilism, or at least can be characterized in this way. Both right and left variations insist that the system needs to be overhauled, and they latch onto the myth, and often reality, that our political representatives are too corrupt to salvage. Donald Trump seized on this belief to become president twice.
I am your warrior, I am your justice, and for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
While leftist populism has largely struggled to seize power, proponents of political nihilism, aside from anarchists, would likely not self-identify as nihilists. The term in this context is intended to delegitimize political movements. It's not yet a stable concept at this point in time. However, as we'll see, the concept of nihilism is taken much more seriously later on in the works of the existentialist Friedrich Nietzsche. The philosopher is often associated with nihilism and is widely thought to have embraced it. But is it true that he advocated for a belief in nothingness? Was that really his gift to the world? Anyone who has seriously considered his work knows that he is not an advocate of nihilism, but that it does play an important role in his writing.